to Dhriti Ghosh to kindly begin the session and
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Mahavir, for the introduction. So, very good morning to all of you. Myself, Dr. Dhriti Sundar Ghosh. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Physics, IIT Bhilai, and I hope that you all are safe and healthy wherever you are. So, as you can see, today the topic of my talk is physics of photovoltaics, and from the title itself, you can guess that I'm basically going to talk about the photovoltaics. Uh, Probably you have heard of this terminology. This is nothing but yeah, about solar cells. And today, since I am a hardcore physicist, so I will talk about the physics of photovoltaics. Okay, so what are the working principles and what are the physics behind the solar cells which you see? Whenever you go out, if you see a solar cell in somebody's rooftop, or if you see a solar cell operated street light, then by attending this talk, I hope that by the end of this talk you will be able to understand at least the physics behind the photovoltaics. I cannot guarantee that you will know everything in 1.5 hours of talk, but what I will try to do from my side is that by the end of this talk, you should be, able to understand what is the physics behind these solar cells or the photovoltaics. Fine. Okay, great. So before I move on and talk about the topic itself, I just wanted to briefly give you my own profile. You know, so basically, I am from Assam. I did my bachelor's and master's in Assam itself. I did my master's at IIT Guwahati. Then I went on to do my PhD in ICFO in Spain, and I got graduated in 2012. Then I did my first postdoc in the same institute in Spain, and then I went on to do my second postdoc in Germany. And then I came back to India as a Ramanujan Fellow, and I worked in National Physical Laboratory in New Delhi. And then after spending a few months in New Delhi, I joined IIT Bhilai as a assistant professor. Great. So, the thing is that why we need to study this topic, why we need to know this topic, why it is important. This is also very much important to know about these facts. Okay. The first thing is that what is the need for energy. Okay, so the figure on the left hand side, you can see how the world population is growing over the years, right? It started from around, the graph shows the growth of population from 1950 to around 2050. Okay, and it is divided into two regions. You can see the blue regime and the purple regime. The blue regime is the population, world population for the developed countries, more developed countries, basically European and North American countries. And the purple region or the violet region is showing the world population in less developed countries, mainly African and Asian countries. And as you can see, the motive behind showing this figure is that you see how the world population is keep on increasing, right? You can see a little bit of saturation as we move towards to 2050, but still it's on the upward trend, right? And corresponding to this world population increase, this is the figure on the right hand side shows you the world energy consumption. Okay, and as you can see that it started from 1820. I mean, the graph starts from 1820 and it is up to 2050 around. And as you can see, the need for the energy, world energy consumption is rising exponentially with time, right? As the population is increasing, the need for the energy is also increasing exponentially. Fine. And if you take a closer look, you will find that this world energy consumption is divided to different color regimes and different colors showing different by which technology they are being produced. Like the blue here is showing is for the biofuels. The red one here is for the coal. The green is the oil. This purple violet is the natural gas, and you see hydroelectricity as well as nuclear energy as well, right? So one can easily see that it has been dominated by the fossil fuels, right? Coal, oil, natural gas. These are the three major way by which we are producing our energy at this point of time, right? So the world needs energy. The motive behind this slide is that the world needs energy. Without energy, we cannot do anything in our life, right? And to show this, there are two figures in this slide, and as you can see, on the left hand side is the y-axis is human development current index, and the x-axis is the annual per capita electricity use. So this human development index is kind of, you can say that how much the people of a particular country is are developed, right? The y-axis. And as you can see, the more developed countries, like the European countries as well as the US, Canada, they are on the right hand side top. You see Canada here, you see US here. And what does it mean? It means that the people or the population inside these countries, they have a higher human development index, which is good, right? We want to have the higher y values. And also correspondingly, you can see that their annual per capita electricity use is also higher, which means the countries which uses more electricity, the people are more happier there, or people are more developed in those countries, right? This is what we can infer from this particular graph. If we try to find out where our country, India, and other countries are, you can see India is somewhere around here, right? So we have still a lot of things to catch up. So we want, as a country, we would like to have somewhere around here, right? As top, as on the higher side as possible, right? Similarly, if you try to find out where China is there, because these days we are always being compared to China. So if I try to find out where China is situated, you can see that China is way above India. India's values is about 0.55, whereas China is around 0.7. So we have we have a really lot of things to catch up, fine. Similarly, on the right hand side, what you see is on the y-axis is your energy being used, and the x-axis is the GDP. I believe that you all understand what is GDP, which is a gross domestic product, and this is a measure of how well a nation is developed, right? The higher the GDP, the better is for that particular country, right? And as you can see that countries like which are the more developed countries like the United States and Canada, what you can find is that they have a very high GDP, right? And correspondingly, they use higher energy as well. So again, the same conclusion that if you want a country to be more developed, if you want the people there to be more happier, you need to produce more electricity and you need to use more power, right? So if I try to find out where our own country, India, is situated, and we find that it is somewhere around here. So as far as the GDP is concerned, we are way beyond more developed nations, and as well as also along the y-axis, as you can see, we are using very much energy, right? If I try to find out the China is better than India, but of course it is not as good as that of more developed European and North American countries. Fine. So from these two slides, it's very clear to us that we need more energy, and because the more the energy, more the developed the nation is. Fine. And correspondingly, you can see there is a two pictures here in this particular slide. On the left hand side, this is the world at night, and you can see how the world looks like at night. And you can see that in the North American countries, European countries, India, the bright spots are the places where the lighting is being used, right? This is how the electricity is being used. And on the right hand side, you can see how the solar energy, how the sun, how much the light is being illuminated from the solar to the world. And as you can see that, the main population of this world is concentrated in the middle part of this curve, is these pictures. And this is also the area where we get the maximum sunlight. So the conclusion is that the solar supply, the energy which is being supplied by the sun to us in terms of via sunlight, is well matched with the future energy demand. Yeah, wherever the population is being concentrated, we get larger sunlight, right? Okay, so just a little bit of a recap of the things which we already know, but it's very important to just to have a a perspective of what are the things going on. So we know that coal, oil, and gas are the fossil fuels because they have been formed from the fossilized remains of prehistoric plants and animals. And at present, they provide around 66% of the world electrical power and 95% of the world's total energy demands, right? We know how energy is produced from the coal and how energy is being produced from the natural gases. the main motive behind showing this, these definitions is because of the fact that as a human being, we haven't yet shown the burning desire, right? We haven't yet shown the burning desire to move away from use of them. We are still using coal, we are still using natural gas, we are still using, petrol and diesel for our vehicles, and we haven't shown the burning desire to shift away from these technologies, because we know that they are not here for forever. At some point of time, they are going to be, finished, and we should look for alternatives. You may have seen that nowadays there are many cars which are being available, which are electrical vehicle, which doesn't use the conventional petrol or diesel, right? So but we need more effort from our side, to replace these fossil fuels, and as a present generation, we should do more, to look for other sources of energy, like installing solar panels in our homes, or all those things. Okay, we know what are the drawbacks of fossil fuels, right? I don't need to tell it to you. You all know all about it, that fossil fuels produces pollution, right? It leads to greenhouse effect. It leads to climate change. There are many problems, right? Only yesterday I was reading a news article where it was saying that in India, compared to last year, we are having 34% more lightning, thunder lightning. And we have seen many news very recently that there are many people in Rajasthan died because of the lightning, and this has been attributed to the climate change. And this climate change is what is the origin of this climate change? This climate change is because of the greenhouse effect, right? And this greenhouse effect is because of the fossil fuels. So everything is correlated, right? So as I said, there are many disadvantages, and we need to move away from these fossil fuels. We know that there are other sources of energy as well. Nuclear energy is the most prominent one. It's very efficient. A small amount of material of this nuclear fuel can produce a large amount of energy. It's very good, but we know that it has some disadvantages as well, right? We have seen in very recently in 2011, when there was a tsunami in Japan, in Fukushima Daiichi, the nuclear plant. There was an accident in the nuclear power plant, and then also in 1986, Chernobyl in Russia, which is presently in Ukraine, there was a very big nuclear disaster. So these technologies, nuclear energy production, is very risky, in the sense that if something goes wrong, it goes wrong very horribly, right? Although it's a very clear, it's a good source, but it needs to take care. We need to take care of it, because of the fact that if something goes wrong, it will go very wrong, right? I encourage you guys to please have a look at this particular Chernobyl and the Fukushima. There are many YouTube documentaries are available there, so you go through that. It's very interesting how this happened, and how how people are coping with this nuclear disaster. Okay, so let's compare how much, how big is the solar energy we are receiving in Earth. Okay, let's compare. Is it enough to fulfill our needs? Is it efficient enough, or is it not good enough, right? So let's compare it. So this yellow, the circle shows you the solar energy which is being received by the Earth in a single year. Okay, so this yellow circle is the energy which is being received by the Earth in a single year. Okay, and the circle here, which is in brown in color, is the use of energy per year by the whole population of the Earth. This is the world energy use. So as you can see that this is the this yellow one and this brown one. This is very short fraction, a small fraction of it, which means that the solar energy which you're receiving at Earth is way beyond and what is being required. So it's abundant. It's you cannot finish it. As long as the humankind is there, I believe solar energy will be there. So we should try to maximize this solar energy as much as possible. And if you compare this one to other sources of energy, like this is the uranium, then this is the petroleum, this is the natural gas, this is the wind energy which is being there. And as you can see, the size of this yellow, and remember this yellow circle is only for a year, whereas this the uranium, the petroleum, and the natural gas, they are only for, this is the total reserve. So this is very much clear that as far as the abundance is concerned, solar energy is way above other sources of energy, right? So we do not need to worry about that it will be finished after some years. No, solar energy is there as long as humankind is there, I believe. Okay. Okay. Now,
Excuse me, sir,
this
can
is,
I ask one question from the last slide?
yes.
Sorry for interrupting. Sir, what do you mean by to 23,000 per year?
So this is
23,000.
exajoules. So 23,000. This is the unit is in terawatt per year. Terawatt.
This is the total energy coming from the sun.
Sun. Yeah.
On the earth.
Yeah.
Okay.
On
the
earth
earth or okay.
on the earth. On the earth. We are receiving this much. Okay.
Okay.
Sir,
Okay.
how much energy is emitted by the sun? Is it calculated?
I mean, it must be calculated, but I haven't shown it here. This is the something which has been received by the earth. I'm only concerned about what is the energy being received within the earth. I don't care what much is energy being received in Mars or Venus or uranium. Let's concentrate on Earth, because we are living in Earth, and we need this is the energy being received by the Earth. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Great. Now, this is the again, this is the world figure, and you can see this yellowish reddish region is the region where we are getting the solar energy, right? And you can see some black dots also there in this figure. So the reason I'm showing this figure is the fact that suppose you cover these black dots, the area corresponding to these black dots, and they are spread over all over the world, right? One dot is on the North America, one dot is South America, one dot in Africa, one dot in the Middle East, one dot is somewhere around China, one dot is in Australia. And if you cover this much area by a solar cell, which is only 8% efficient. So if I cover these areas, these black dot areas by solar cells, which is only 8% efficient, then I can, fulfill all the energy needs of the Earth. So this is how important and how fascinating these solar cells are. So you need only to cover this much area to fulfill the energy needs of the Earth, right? And please remember that I said only 8%. Right now, the commercial solar cells which you can buy from the Amazon or or the local shop, they are around somewhere around 18 to 20%. So if I replace those 8% by 18 to 20% of solar cell, then the area needed to cover for fulfilling the energy needs is even smaller. Okay. So the idea is that the solar energy is good enough to fulfill all the energy needs of the humankind, right? It's not that the amount of solar energy is less. No, it's not like that. You do not need to cover all the areas. No, no. You only need to cover this much of areas, which is pretty only a very small fraction of the total space available to us. And also remember that we do not need to cover these solar cells in open areas, right? We can cover this solar cell in our rooftops, in our parking places, even in the windows. You can see. It's not necessary to install them in open areas. You can install anywhere, right? So the effective area being covered will be even smaller if I consider this particular fact, right? And the largest solar farm is in I don't know whether it's still valid or not, but it seems that in Kamuthi, Tamil Nadu, if somebody is from Tamil Nadu can comment, that we have the largest covers an area of 10 square kilometers. This is installed in an open area. Okay. Okay. Now the question is it cheap enough? Is it comparable to the other sources of energy? Well, this graph answers this question. So when we started producing these solar cells, it was around $76 per watt of which was the cost. As you can see that over the year, it has in 2015 has come down to 0.30. So and it is similar to the cost of energy being produced from other sources of energy. And the reason for such a development, the reduction in price, is because the innovation, of course. People have found new ways to make cheaper solar cells. Research is going on. So every day there is something new coming up, and the price is still going down and down and down. And also the scaling. You know that whenever you produce something in large amount, the price goes down, right? Because now people are more concerned. People are using solar panels. So which companies are making more solar panels? Therefore, also the price is coming down with each day, right? Okay. This is a graph which shows how much photovoltaic PV are installed, and as you can see over the time, it is continuously increasing, right? The amount of installation which is being done for solar panels is continuously increasing over the period of the time. Okay. Now, so far so nice that we have understood why photovoltaics is required, why solar cells are required. We know the background. Let's go into the real topic. What is photovoltaics? Okay. So if I try to just simply define it, because definition is important, right? So if I try to define it, so what is photovoltaics? So the branch of technology concerned with the production of electric current using materials that exhibit photovoltaic effect. Okay. So this is the definition of photovoltaics. Now, now you must be thinking, sorry. Yes.
You can go back to your slide. Can you also brief of the solar cost in India nowadays? What is going on?
I don't have the data with me right now, but you can always Google. It's very simple. Just Google it. There is a lot of effort being from the NDA government to implement solar panels. I mean, there are lots and lots of efforts going on.
In Google, yes, sir. In Google, almost the companies have quoted their own panel cost, but nobody is saying the per baht is the cost. How much is the cost of per baht?
I'm not so sure about what is the, because this one is the global data.
Yes, sir.
Okay, this is not particularly to India. This is a global data. Yeah. Yes, and so I'm pretty much sure I'm not so sure what is the price per watt in India, but this is something which I took it for the world data. Okay, and this is the average over all over the world. Yeah.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So now you have got to understand what is photovoltaics, right? Now the question is, it says photovoltaic effect. Now we need to understand what is the photovoltaic effect. So I have defined photovoltaic effect as well. So it is the creation of voltage and current in a material when exposed to light, right? If you expose light to a particular set of materials, we will get to know which material I'm talking about. Then if it produces voltage and current, then we call it, that effect is known as photovoltaic effect, right? Now the question is, which type of material shows the photovoltaic effect? Okay, is it the insulators, is it the metals, or is it the semiconductors? I don't know whether I believe that all of you who are attending this FDP is mainly from the science background. I believe so, and you have gone through class 12th NCERT books. I mean, there is a chapter on solid semiconductors. So if you have gone through that, you will straight away can tell it to me that the materials which I'm talking about are the semiconductors, right? In insulators, it's not easy to produce free holes or free electrons, right? In metals, the electrons are already free, right? They are moving in random direction inside the metal, so they do not constitute a current there. While the semiconductors, which we will see again later on in my slides, that how the semiconductors can produce this photovoltaic effect. So yes, semiconductor is the material which which shows this photovoltaic effect. Not all the semiconductors show it, but some of them shows in larger values compared to others, right? Okay, good. Now some of you may get confused with this photovoltaic effect with photoelectric, right? They are a bit different from each other. That's the reason why I've included this particular topic, photoelectric versus photovoltaic effect. And what I can do is simply give a second. So if you remember from your previous class, we studied this photoelectric effect in class 12th as well, I believe. I remember correctly. So what was there in photoelectric effect? So you had a metal sheet, right? There is a metal sheet, and it is put inside a vacuum, right? So this is your vacuum, and if you shine light on this particular metal, then what happens is that it ejects electrons, right? It ejects electrons. And what was the equation of this photoelectric effect, for which Mr. Einstein got the Nobel Prize in 1921? He said that the incoming energy h nu is equals to the phi plus kinetic energy, right? This was the equation, the famous equation, photoelectric effect equation. So this is the incoming energy, and this is the work function. So work function is defined as the minimum amount of energy which is required to eject the electrons out of the metal surface, and the rest of the energy is being converted to kinetic energy. Now the thing is that when particular wavelength of light shines, we were able to see some current, right? We were able to see some current in the external circuit. Sorry, this one should go like this. Okay, so this was your photoelectric effect. So in photoelectric effect also you see some electricity, and as I told you, and as you know, that in photovoltaic also you see some current. The question is how they are different from each other, right? So I'm going to list out some of the difference between photoelectric and photovoltaic effect. Okay, the first one is that in the case of photoelectric effect, as you can see, this electron is being ejected out of the metal, right? The electron is being ejected out of the material here, and it goes into the vacuum, right? So this is ejected out of the material. Sorry for my handwriting. While in the case of photovoltaics, the electrons or even the holes, they do not come out of the material. Okay, they remain inside the material, but they are free to move now. So this is one of the major differences between photoelectric and photovoltaic effect, right? And what is the second effect? Second difference is that this photoelectric effect is mainly surface phenomena. The electrons are only emitted from the surface of this particular material, this metal. Okay, whereas in photovoltaics, this is a bulk phenomena. So this is surface, and whereas in photovoltaics it is bulk phenomena, right? And what is the third difference? The third difference, and what is the major difference, is that photoelectric is for metals, whereas in photovoltaics it's for semiconductors. Fine. So I hope you understood the difference between photoelectric and photovoltaic effect by now. Okay, good. So moving to our next slide, let's go back and see how photovoltaics was discovered. Okay, let's go a little bit of the history. If you know history, it gives you more insight in the topic, and you get more interested towards the topic. So photovoltaics, so it was discovered in 1839. So it's quite a long back ago. Okay, by Mr. Alexander Edmund Becquerel. Okay, and he claimed that shining light on an electrode submerged in a conductive solution would create an electric current. Okay, so this was what Mr. Alexander Edmund Becquerel observed in 1829. And what was his age when he discovered this effect? He was only 19 years of age. So he was a very, very brilliant guy himself. And I don't know whether do you remember this surname, Becquerel? Can you recollect this surname? Have you heard of this this surname, Becquerel? This is a French origin. If you remember X-rays or radioactivity, Henry Becquerel. So Henry Becquerel, who got the Nobel Prize for discovery of radioactivity, who got the Nobel Prize, was the son of this fellow. So it seems that father and the son, both of them are very brilliant. And this is the original paper which he published, showing this photovoltaic effect. Okay, so as I said, in 1839, this photovoltaic effect was discovered. Then in the year 1873 to 1876, selenium, which is a semiconductor, this photovoltaic effect was observed in this selenium. Then in 1883, the first solar cell was created, which was having efficiency of around 1 to 2% only. Okay, and remember the modern day solar cells have efficiencies ranging from 15 to 20%. So we started with around 1 to 2%. Now it has reached to commercially available solar cells are around 15 to 20%, and those which are produced in research labs, they are around 26%. Okay. In 1827, photoelectric effect was observed, and in 1953 to 1956, people have started using silicon instead of selenium to make solar cells. And I'm pretty much sure that you have heard this name of Bell Laboratories. So this Bell Laboratories in 1956, they produced the first silicon solar cell, which was around 6% efficient. Okay, and these are the three fellows who made it: Pearson, Chapin, and Fuller, starting from the left. And you can see this is the original paper which they published showing the effect of solar cells. So this is a new silicon PN junction photocell for converting solar radiation in electrical power, and this was received in January 11, 1954. Okay, and after that it became commercial. The silicon solar cell became commercial. And you can see one of the advertisement here of silicon solar cell. You see a family sitting in the garden and they are producing electricity, and we can see some batteries as well here on the back side, right? So it's a very fascinating, right? Okay, and one of the major turning point in usage of solar cell was when they were used in satellites, right? So you need energy at the space to operate this satellites, right? Artificial satellites. So in 1958, the first solar cell powered satellite Vanguard 1 was launched, right? It has a launch mass of around 1.47 kilos and diameter of 16 centimeters. And as I said, this was the turning point, because now because we cannot have batteries there in the space. I mean, you cannot put enough batteries, so we need some continuous sources of energy in the space if you want to operate the satellites. And when solar cell was used, it revolutionized the field. Then people started to take this solar cells seriously, that yes, they can be useful to us. Before that, it was more of a fancier thing, but with this application, the solar cell, people started to realize that yes, solar cell can be the source of energy. Of course, it was in space, but very soon it is going to be giving power in our Earth as well, right? Okay, good, fine. So now we will move on and talk about solar cell itself, or the photovoltaics itself. As you can see, I have plotted a picture here. On the left hand side, I have the solar spectrum. On the right hand side, I have the charge collection. So producing electricity from a solar cell involves these phenomena. We have the solar spectrum, then we have the light absorption, then we have the charge excitation, then we have charge drift or diffusion, charge separation, and the charge collection, right? And the efficiency of a particular solar cell or a photovoltaic cell depends on how efficient these individual processes are, right? How efficient we are absorbing the light, how efficiently we are extracting exciting the charges. I will explain all these things, so don't worry. Okay, but what I want to understand is that producing an electricity out of a solar cell seems simple, but to make a very efficient solar cell, you need to know what are the different processes taking place inside the material, how the electricity is being produced, and to know that that's the reason why I say it's the physics of photovoltaics, right? And these are the different processes which are being taking place, right? And the total efficiency of the solar cell, which I said neta total, is nothing but the multiplication of each individual efficiencies. How much light, how efficiently I'm absorbing the light, neta ABS, and similarly all others. And actually, it should be it should be equals like this. So the neta total is equals to the multiplication of these individual processes. And now we will get to know. I will tell you more about this individual processes. Okay. Okay. First, I will talk about the solar spectrum itself. Fine. So this is the solar spectrum. So this is the solar light which is being received at the Earth. The one which is the yellow one is the sunlight which is the top of the atmosphere. Okay. The black curve here is the black body radiation simulation for 5250 temperature, and the red curve and the red portion is the radiation at the sea level. This is the radiation which we actually received in the Earth. Okay. The yellow one is the one which is the top of the atmosphere, but when the sunlight crosses the atmosphere and reaches the Earth's crust, there are many absorption takes place. Like this dip is because of the oxygen. This is because of the water vapor. This is again because of the water, and because of which the intensity is lowered by the time it reaches the Earth's crust, right? And what is the important thing to note here is that we get the maximum intensity in this visible part, right? This visible part, which is around from 375 to around 700 nanometer. This region, this is the region where we get the maximum solar light. Of course, there is some little bit of UV part as well, and also IR part, infrared part, right? So UV is around 5%, visible is around 50%, and infrared is around 46%. But the problem is that with infrared is stretched, started from around 700 to 2500. So it is distributed, over a very large wavelength. Whereas this 50% of visible light is concentrated only, few hundreds of nanometers. So the maximum intensity is somewhere around here. So if we are trying to make a solar cell, so what should be our aim? Our aim should be to utilize this much light as much as possible. You understood, right? So we should try to maximally absorb light which is from this part. Of course, it is very good if you can absorb these parts as well. It will be very nice. But for a single solar cell, it may not be possible to absorb all the lights. A solar cell can absorb only a particular wavelength of light, right? It cannot absorb all the lights. So our aim should be to try to absorb as much light as possible in this visible regime. Okay, good. So once we understood the solar spectrum, let's go into the light absorption. Okay, so what do we mean by light absorption? It simply means that we need, if I have a material, if I have a semiconductor material which shows photovoltaic effect, we want that material to absorb light, right? The more the light is absorbed, the more will be the electricity. Simple, right? The more the amount of light I'm able to absorb from the solar cell, I will produce more electricity. So as a researcher, as a physicist, as an engineer, what should my aim? My aim should be to find a material. First of all, my aim should be to find a material which absorbs most of the light, right? I mean, I need a semiconductor material. Remember, it's not only any material. I want a semiconductor material which absorbs most of the light, right? And it absorbs the light when I use very small amount of that material. It's not that I need a very thick layer of material to absorb all the light. I want to, as an engineer, what should I look for? I should look for a material, a semiconductor material, which absorbs maximum amount of light using a small amount of material, right? That's how the cost of solar cell will be reduced. So I want to use minimum amount of material, and I want to absorb maximum amount of light, right? So this is the figure. On the left hand side, you can see it shows the y-axis is your absorption coefficient. For those who are not familiar with this terminology, so this is the measure of how much light you can absorb per centimeter of a material. Okay, so if I take 1 centimeter of a particular material, how much light it can absorb, that is this absorption coefficient. And then the y-axis and the x-axis is the wavelength. So this is for different materials, as you can see. So blue one is for the gallium arsenide, green one is for germanium, the red one is for silicon, and many other materials are given here. And higher the value of this material, this absorption coefficient, the better the material is able to absorb the sunlight. And as you can see from this figure, it seems that this green curve, which corresponds to germanium, is the very good material, right? It can absorb light from UV regime to IR regime, it seems, right? By just looking at this particular graph, what I conclude is that germanium is the best material. And where is my silicon? Because we know that silicon is largely used for making solar cells. So if I try to find where my silicon is the red one, and you can see that silicon is somewhere around here. And it's not so good compared to that of the germanium. Okay. By simply looking at this picture, it seems to me that silicon is not good compared to germanium. But we know that silicon is mainly used for making solar cells. Why it's so? Why germanium is not used? So these are some of the questions we would like to answer through this FDP. Maybe you need to study a little bit more to get more elaborate answers. You need to make some effort from your side, because 90 minutes is not enough to understand the full the full physics. But as I say, I will try my best so that at least you get the curiosity and you go back and read a little bit about the solar cells, so that you should know. Okay. As I can say, so the larger the material you use, I mean the larger thickness of the material you use, you will be able to absorb large amount of sunlight, right? And from this particular graph, we can always calculate how much of a thickness of a particular material is required to absorb 100% of the light, right? If 100 photons are coming from the sunlight, how much thickness of material I need to absorb all the 100 photons? So I can calculate that. It's very simple. Okay. But as I said, making large thicknesses is not the solution always. If you're using large thicknesses, you are using more materials, right? More thickness of the material, which means that you are increasing the cost of the material itself, of the solar cell itself. And similarly, if you use very thick materials, what happens is that the electrical mobility also comes into the picture. Probably by the end of this talk, we will understand why mobility is also important. But what I can say from at this moment is that if you make a particular material very thick, okay, and when light is being absorbed by this particular material and electrons and holes are produced inside that particular material, those electrons and holes need to travel inside the material, right? And therefore large thicknesses is not always recommended, because if the material doesn't have a good mobility, then even if the material absorbs all the sunlight, it will not be useful. Okay, so large thickness is not the solution. We need a material which can absorb as much as light as possible, being with thin. It has to be thin as well. Okay, so how can we overcome this? That we use small amount of material or small thickness of material, and we want to maximize the absorption, right? So we need to find ways so that thin materials can absorb as much light as possible. And this comes to the topic of this light management. Okay, which means we need to manage the light inside the solar cell, right? And I will show you how. So on the left hand side is a picture of a silicon solar cell. Don't worry about there are many things in the picture, so don't worry about the other things. What I want to concentrate is on the top surface. You see there are some conical or triangular shaped or rectangular shaped pointed things are there. This is a typical feature of a silicon solar cell. And if you take a scanning electron microscope, this pointed things looks like this when you zoom in. The question is why it is there, right? The reason for doing is that it improves the light absorption. Okay, and I will show you how. Just give me a second. So suppose you have a surface, a flat surface, okay, and if light comes in, right, some of the light will be reflected back and some of the light will be transmitted inside the material, right? I have a material, this is a material. Instead, if I have a material which is a zigzag in shape, it's not flat, what happens? Suppose if light comes in here, right? So some of the light will be transmitted back, transmitted inside the material, and some of the light will be reflected. And suppose the angle is such that the reflected light goes here, and it gets absorbed again, and it's reflected back. So as you can see, compared to this this flat, if your surface is flat, the amount of light which is reflected is more compared to here, because in this particular figure, when the surface is zigzag, so this is zigzag, you see, right? When you have zigzag surfaces, the chances that the light is being transmitted inside the material is more. You can see it, in this particular example, it is being transmitted inside the material twice, whereas it is transmitted only once here. So this is how this texturing, this is known as texturing. This is the word texturing. Doing this kind of stuff is called texturing, you know, and texturing helps to improve the absorption, right? Of course, you can put this texturing not only on the front surface. Here the texturing is being done only on the front side. So light comes from the top, right? Light comes from the top and it gets absorbed more, and will be less reflected. It will be less, and more will be the transmitted. Okay. Of course, this texturing can be done on the back side as well. We can do this texturing on the back side as well, right? And some of you may be asking or thinking why we need the texturing on the back side as well. Is it required? Well, I can tell you, yes, it is required. So suppose the light, let me change the color of my pen, so it will be a bit more, okay. Suppose light comes in, okay, H nu, light comes in. So not all the light will be absorbed in this particular material. Some of them will reach the backside, right? Some of them will reach the backside. And if there is no texturing on the backside, what will happen? If it is a flat surface on the backside, those reflected, light will be passed out. And if there is texturing, the chances that it will be reflected back inside the material will be higher, right? So these are the different techniques by which we can increase the absorption of light inside a material. We cannot make the material thick because it has some electrical issues. It will also increase the cost. So what we want to do is that as an engineer, as a physicist, as a researcher, yes.
Can we use anti-reflection coating on the back side?
I'm coming into that. It's a very good point. I'm coming into that. Please bear a minute for with me. Okay. Okay. So of course, one of the ways texturing, right? We have seen how texturing helps into to improve the light absorption. The next way, how can we do it, is this called sorry. Okay, anti-reflection coating. As one of the members pointed out, yes, we can also do anti-reflection coating. I hope you all understand what is anti-reflection coating is. Those person who are using specs, who wears specs, will know that you know, if you buy a specs which has anti-reflection coating, it's cost much higher compared to a normal glass specs, right? Because so what is the use of this anti-reflection coating? So this anti-reflection coating, what does it does is that when light comes in, as you can see here, this is the light. This is the light which comes in here. It gets reflected, you know, from the interfaces. So this is the one part of the reflected part. This is the second part of the reflected part. And if both this reflected part interfere destructively, this is again class 12 level physics. If you remember interference, it is exactly the same. So this is the material. So this gray color is the material, my photovoltaic material. And what I did is that I coated this material with another material, which is represented by this light blue material. Okay, and I have to choose the thickness of this material, this anti-reflective coating, in such a way that when this reflected you know, components, I have to choose this thickness in such a way that this reflected components interfere destructively, which is exactly this case here. You see the crest and the trough. This is the crest and this is the trough. So they are exactly opposite to each other, right? So as you can see here, right, this here. So they are interfering destructively. Therefore, the reflected part will be less. and the more part will be transmitted inside the material. Whereas in this particular case, this is interfering constructively. So this is destructive and this is constructive, right? So both this component which is reflected from the top surface are interfering constructively, therefore the reflection will be more. So yes, we can use anti-reflection coating as well to improve the absorption of the material itself, right? And if you want to know the more about anti-reflection coating, the physics of anti-reflection coating, I mean, you know what is the formula for reflection. Reflection is nothing but N1 minus N2 divided by N1 plus N2 whole square, if you remember, right? Where N1 and N2 are the refractive indexes. And you can choose this anti-reflective coating. What is the best thickness? So you need to choose lambda by 4. The thickness of this anti-reflection coating should be lambda by 4. Lambda is the wavelength, and the refractive index of this anti-reflective coating, which is N1, should be N not Ns. Okay. If you can find a material which has a refractive index which follows this formula and whose thickness is lambda by 4, then this particular material will act as a anti-reflective coating. Okay. So this anti-reflective coating by itself is be a very big topic. So if you have time, you can please go back and check how anti-reflective coating are being made and what are the physics behind it. The physics I already told you. So we need a material which has a refractive index like this, and whose thickness should be around lambda by 4. Okay. Okay. So this is a typical example. As you can see, this is the bare silicon. This is a bare silicon here. If you have a silicon, the reflection is around 30%, as you can see here. But if you put a silicon under glass, the reflection reduces. And if you put anti-reflection coating on the silicon, then you see the reflection. The reflection is almost 0 in this particular wavelength, right? Remember, less the reflection, better for us, right? You remember it, right? So if you, if I have a material, let me go back to my pen. So if I have a material and light is coming here, I want very less reflection, I want more transmittance. So I want to reduce this reflection, right? So by reflection reducing, I'm actually increasing the transmittance, right? And therefore, as you can see that when I use anti-reflection coating, the reflection goes from around 30%, to almost less than 5%. Yeah, in this visible part. This is my visible part, visible regime. Remember, we want to maximize the visible regime, right? So this is my visible. And on the right hand side is the picture with and without texturization. As you can see, when there is no light trapping. So this is not a reflection. The y-axis is not reflection. It is something else, which is the current density. Current density is a light current which being produced by the solar cell, right? Okay. So when there is no light trapping, the current density is lower, and when there is a light trapping, you can see the current density is higher, which means we need more light trapping as well. I'm skipping this topic, which is up and down conversion. The reason is that it's a bit complicated, but I can tell you a little bit about it. If you remember the solar spectrum, right? The solar spectrum was something like this, right? And we say that we want to maximize the use of this particular part, right? Because this is the visible part and this has the maximum intensity. So what is the up conversion, down conversion? Because a material can only absorb light in a particular wavelength, there are part of the spectrum which are being missed, because a material cannot absorb all the spectrum of the light. So this up conversion and down conversion is a technique by which we can change the wavelength of the incoming light by putting some materials. So I'm not going to the details because this is not so important for our topic, but still, if you want, I will suggest please just Google it, this up conversion and down conversion. Okay. Okay, now let's go to the next topic, which is our charge excitation, and let's try to understand how this is important for us and how it is how it is helping in the current generation, how it helps in the photovoltaic effect. Okay, I believe that all of you understand the semiconductor physics. You understand what is the p-type semiconductor, what is n-type semiconductor. I hope that you understand what is a diode, because that understanding is required, and this is something which is taught in our class 12, right? So I sincerely believe that you remember. I know that all of you have read it, but the thing is that we don't remember it all this things because we read it in very long back, right? Class 12th, sometime in BSc as well, in masters as well, but we tend to forget those things. But even if you don't remember, don't worry, just go through my slides and also go back to your class 12 NCERT books. It's very simple, very simply written there and very much well explained there. Okay, what is a diode, what is n-type, what is p-type, all those things. So I hope that you will remember all those things. So this is something I took it from from the internet, and I sincerely hope that you remember. So this is what this is, the band diagram, how energy bands are produced inside a solid, right? This is for a silicon, and these are the outermost orbitals 2p and 2s. And when we when we reduce down the distance between two particular atoms, there will be no discrete energy levels, but there will be energy bands, right? And when these energy bands are produced, on the outermost types, we have the conduction band and the valence band, right? So I'm not going to the details of this one. This is something which is being taught in class 12. So if you don't remember, please go back and check it out. Okay. So this is n-type material and this is a p-type material. Remember, I told you that we've always said that we want semiconductors, right? And that's the reason why we need semiconductors: n-type, p-type, diode, how diode behaves, all those things. Okay, so this is the n-type semiconductor. We all know what is n-type semiconductors. N-type semiconductors are the semiconductors which has electrons are the majority carriers, right? Whereas the p-type, holes are the majority carriers, right? The conduction is being dominated by electrons in n-type, whereas the conduction is dominated by holes in the p-type material. And also, I hope that you remember that there is something called donor level in n-type. There is something called acceptor level in p-type material. Okay, and there is also something called Fermi level. So how do we define the Fermi level? So typically we define Fermi level is the level where the probability of finding an electron is exactly the half, 50%. This is how we define the Fermi level. Okay, again, this is something which we learned in our class 12. Okay, so if you remember this thing, I'm assuming that you at least remember a little bit of this n-type, p-type, and based on that assumption, I'm moving forward to my next slide. Okay, fine. Now we will try to understand what is optical absorption and what is thermalization loss. Now suppose I have a material, a semiconductor material, and I have the two. So this is my EV, this is my valence band, and this is field states, right? And this is my conduction band, which are empty states, right? When I say field states and what I say empty states, I hope you remember that all the electrons are here now, right? That's why it is called field states, right? And the empty states means there are no band gap, right? And this is your band gap, right? What happens if light comes in? What happens if light comes in here? Suppose now light comes, this is your now light comes, light will happen if so this is your energy of your photon. A photon is coming with an energy of h nu. So three cases can happen. The first case is that when your E photon is exactly that of Eg, right? When the energy of the photon is exactly the same of the band gap, then what will happen? So whatever, if there is an electron here, this will absorb the incoming photon and it will go to conduction band, right? So this will be the new position of my electron. What is the condition? The condition is that the light, the photon which is coming, should have exactly the same energy that of the band gap. So it's called edge to edge, from this edge to this edge. Okay. Now, what will be the second case? Second case is when the energy of incoming photon is larger than that of the band gap, right? And suppose there is an electron here. There was an electron here, and since my incoming photon has a very large energy compared to the band gap, what will happen is that it will go up and it go sit down here, right? Because why it goes from very up above in the empty states in the conduction band, because as I said, my energy of the photon is higher, so the extra energy has to be compensated, right? And what is the third case here? The third case is that when E photon is less than Eg, right? Which means my energy of the incoming photon is less compared to that of the band gap. In that case, there will be no excitation. So this process of shifting of electrons from the valence band to the conduction band is called charge excitation, right? So charge is being excited from the valence band to the conduction band. Okay, charge is being excited. So in this case, there will be no absorption, right? Whereas in these two cases, there will be absorption. Light is being absorbed. In this case, light will not be absorbed. The third case, right? And I also wrote a term which is called thermalization loss. What is thermalization loss? Just consider the second case. Let's consider this second case. What we said, when the energy of the incoming photon is very large compared to the energy band, the electron will be excited to the deep into the conduction band. But this is unstable. So what it will do is it will, after some time, it will relax. It will relax and come down to here. Okay. And this extra energy, this energy will be released as a thermal energy. Okay. So this extra energy will be released as a thermal energy, and that's why it is called thermalization loss. And why we call the question is now why we are calling it loss. Loss is because we needed only this much of energy, right, to excite electron from valence band to the conduction band. But now we have an extra energy. That extra energy is lost as a thermal heat, and that's why the reason why we are calling it a thermalization loss. Okay. So to improve the absorption, so we want our incoming photon, right? We want our incoming photon to satisfy at least these two conditions. Okay. Of course, there will be some thermalization loss in the second case, but it's better than the third case. Remember, no absorption is worse compared to thermalization loss. So we want these first two cases to be satisfied. Okay. Okay. So I hope now you understood what is charge excitation, right? So what is happening? So you see, I was talking about charge excitation here, right? So I want light to be absorbed, and when light is absorbed, that light absorbed will be converted to electron and hole, right? As you can see here. So when light is absorbed, one hole is created here and one electron is created here. It's not created, it was already there, we just excited, right? Excited from the valence band to the conduction band. Okay, so now my electron is here, my hole is here. So we are creating an electron hole pair, right? And this is known as charge excitation. So the more we create such charge excitation is good for my solar cell, because I'm creating more holes, I'm creating more electrons. More holes and more electrons means more current, remember. So this is photovoltaic effect. I'm converting photon to electrons and holes. So more photons are absorbed, more holes are created or excited, and more will be the current. Okay, I hope you are understanding the logic, the chronology. Okay, the logic behind it. So I want my semiconductor material to absorb as much light as possible, using this charge excitation, and it should satisfy at least these two conditions, that E photon should be either exactly equal to Eg or should be greater than the Eg itself. Okay, So fine. If this is okay, I'm moving towards the next, which is charge drift diffusion or charge separation. So this is the most important part of a solar cell, remember, and I'm combining these two effects all together. Okay, so these two are the most important part of the solar cell operation. If you understand this one, you understand the solar cell, you understand the photovoltaics. Okay, so I hope that I will be able to make you understand this particular part. Okay, so I'm combining these two parts, which is charge drift diffusion and charge separation all together. So again, this is a picture which I took from class 12th NCERT books, CBSE. Okay, and it shows, what does it shows? It shows diode, a PN junction diode, right? This is a PN junction diode. So P is on my left hand side, N is on my right hand side. And what happens when you make contact between P and N? This is what has been happening, right? So this is again from class 12th understanding. So as you can see here, the holes are the majority carriers here, right? And electrons are the majority carriers in the N type. So when you make contact between P and N type, there will be creating of something called as, what is this region known as? This is, if you remember from your class 12, this is your depletion region, right? So this is the depletion region, and this is the area, this is the volume of the material which is devoid of any charges. And because of the so when I make contact between P and N type, the holes from the P side start to move towards the N side, and the electrons from the N side starts to move towards the P side, right? And what is this movement known as? This movement, which happens because of the concentration gradient, that process is called diffusion. If you remember, diffusion, electron diffusion, because electrons are more on this side, right? And holes were more in this side. So when you contact this P type and N type together, what happens is that because of diffusion, the electrons will starts to move towards the left hand side, whereas these holes starts to move towards the right hand side. And this is happening because something called as diffusion, right? And it happens because of the concentration gradient. I hope that you understand what is diffusion is. This is the same phenomena because of which if somebody is spraying perfume in one corner of the room, you are able to smell it in the other corner of the room. That is diffusion, because the perfume particles travels through the air from the higher concentration regime to the lower concentration regime. So this diffusion happens because of the concentration gradient. Now, apart from this diffusion, there is something else also happening, which is known as drift. You see, electron drift and hole drift. And what is drift? Drift is the movement of particles because of the electric field, right? Diffusion happens because of the concentration gradient, whereas drift happens because of the electric field. Now, where is the electric field here? The question is, where is the electric field here? Now, because of this diffusion, an electric field is created here, which is plus here, plus here, plus here, plus here, plus here, negative, 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 negative. So a electric field is being created here, which is also known as built-in potential, which again from your class 12th, built-in potential, right? So this, what is the direction of this electric field? Electric field is always from positive towards the negative. So the electric field is this one. Okay, so this is your electric field. So because of this electric field, there will be again some movement. So the holes will start from right to left, and the electron will move from left to right. And after some time, an equilibrium will be set up, equilibrium, because these two phenomena. Let's consider only the electron. So the electron drift is from this to this side, the diffusion is from this to this side. So after some time, there will be an equilibrium, and both the process will stop, and you will get you will reach an equilibrium where a PN junction diode is created, right? So this is something again from class 12. I request you all to please go through your NCERT books or whichever book you followed during your class 12 to fully understand the operation of the solar cell itself. Okay, now if this is okay, now let's go back and see how a diode will behave in dark and illuminated condition. Okay, now let me draw it, and please follow it very carefully. Okay, so I have a PN junction here, So this is p side and this is n side. Okay. If I try to draw the energy band diagram, sorry for my handwriting, I'll try to improve it. If I try to draw the energy band diagram, does the PN junction diode energy level diagram level shows? It is something like this. Right? I don't know whether you remember it or not. This is how it looks like. Right? Let's go back and see. So this is the conduction band. So this is the Fermi energy. Remember, this was the Fermi energy, right? And when you contact this p-type and n-type together, n-type and p-type together, the energy level diagrams comes out to be like this. Let me redraw it. I mean, I try to improve it. Okay, let me try it. So the y-axis is my electron energy, the x-axis is my x, the distance, this is my E. And how does the band diagram of p-type looks like? So it has something like this, right? And when this is the depletion regime, and this is my n-type. So this is my p side and this is my n side, and you see this is the Fermi level, EF. Okay, so when you make contact between p-type and n-type, the Fermi level aligns himself, right? आपने देखा होगा, let me speak in Hindi a little bit so that there are some Hindi speakers as well. I know that आपने देखा होगा जब मिस्त्री जब घर बनाता है ना, मिस्त्री जब घर बनाता है वो दो दीवारों का हाइट मेजर करने की कोशिश करता है कि दोनों साइड की दीवारें सेम साइड है कि नहीं, सेम साइज की है कि नहीं. वो क्या करता है, एक पाइप में पानी भरता है और देखता है कि दोनों का हाइट सेम है कि नहीं, है ना. उसको बोलते हैं वाटर लेवल. एग्जैक्टली Fermi level is exactly doing the same. When you make contact between p type and n type, this Fermi level gets aligned itself. See, the Fermi level align itself. The Fermi level of p side and the Fermi level of n side, they align itself. Okay. And what are the currents? The electron drift is in this direction. I just now told you what is drift and what is diffusion, so I hope you remember. And sorry, this is diffusion. So this is diffusion, electron diffusion. Remember, electron is moving from n side to p side, higher concentration regime to the lower concentration regime. N has a higher concentration of electrons, and that's why it's reaching from n to p side. So electron drift is in the direction. I'm only talking about electron here. I will not talk about holes here, okay? Because if I talk holes as well, you may get confused. So let's concentrate on electrons, movement of electrons only. So the electron drift is from right to left, whereas that of drift will be the opposite. Okay. Now the question is, what happens if I forward bias this PN junction diode? If I forward bias it, this is p side, this is n side. When I say forward biasing simply means that I'm connecting the p side with the positive terminal and the n side with the negative terminal. This is again from class 12. So if I do this, what happens is that I'm forcing the electrons. So let's first see what happens to the energy band diagram. So what will happen? Because I'm forward biasing it, what happens is that the depletion region, there is a depletion region in between these two p and n side, right? So the depletion region will decrease and the height will also decrease. So this is my p side and this is my n side. Now this height is larger compared to this height. So this is smaller. And why it is happening? Because I am forward biasing it. Remember, I am forward biasing. I'm connecting the positive terminal of the battery towards the p side and the negative terminal towards the n side. Okay. And now the Fermi levels are no longer aligned. The Fermi level of the p side is here and the Fermi level of the n side is here, right? And now if I try to draw where the electron drift and electron diffusion will be, So the drift will be more now. So this is your electron drift, and the diffusion will be less. So I'm showing shorter arrows. So this is diffusion. Okay, fine. Now what happens in the case of reverse bias?
ஆமா எல்லாரும் மார்க் போட முடியலன்னு கம்ப்ளைண்ட் பண்ணிட்டே இருக்காங்க.
Okay, I request the audience to switch off their mic. Okay, so this is a p side and n side. Now I'm connecting the negative terminal to the p and then positive terminal to the n. So this is reverse bias, right? So this is reverse and this is forward. So in the case of reverse biasing, what happens is, this is my p side, and since I am reverse biasing it, my barrier increases. So it goes like this. Okay, and where is my Fermi levels now? Fermi levels of the p side is somewhere here, and Fermi level of n side is here. Okay, and if I try to draw the currents here, so now drift will be less here. So this is your electron drift, and diffusion will be a little bit more. Electron diffusion. Okay, I hope you understood this one. This is very important to understand, right? And let's try to draw the IV curve now. Again, whatever I've taught now in this particular slide is from your class 12. I have not introduced any new term here. Whatever I'm going to draw now is something which is new. So let's draw the IV curves here. So this is my I, this is my voltage, I and voltage. Okay, so as you can see, the voltage, so this is my voltage and this is my, sorry, this is my voltage and this is my current. Okay, now what is the difference between the Fermi levels here? They are aligned, right? When there was no biasing, forward or reverse, they were in the simply the same line, this Fermi level, right? Which means the voltage is somewhere around here. The voltage is 0, sorry, right? And correspondingly, there is no current as well. There is no current flowing from either left to right, because the electron drift and then the electron diffusion, they are of the same magnitude, right? They are of the same magnitude. The electron drift and electron diffusion, they're cancelling out each other, and therefore there is no current. And of course, there is no voltage because the Fermi levels are perfectly aligned with each other. So the corresponding point is somewhere around here on the origin. What about this forward bias case? Now there is a current, right? Now there is a current. And what is the positive direction of current? The positive direction is current is when the electrons is moving from left to right, sorry, from n side to p side. And now see, the electron drift is larger, right? So the current is higher now. So the corresponding point should be where now again, where will be my voltage? Voltage is positive or negative in this case, forward biasing. You see there is a difference between the Fermi levels here. The n side is on the higher on the higher side, and the p side is on the lower side, because this is my energy, right? This is my energy, so it is increasing here. So difference between these two is the voltage. So voltage is positive and the current is also positive, because the current is flowing from the n side to p side. So this is my n side and this is p side. So therefore I am somewhere around here, right? In case of no biasing, I am some in the origin. For biasing, I am somewhere around here. In the case of reverse biasing, as you can understand, I will be somewhere around here. Because now voltage is negative. You see, the n side voltage is lower compared to the p side voltage. So this is negative. This is negative. This is positive here. Fine. Now, if I draw these three figures, if I combine these three, what will happen? If I combine these three, if I combine, let me draw it here. This is something which you already know, the diode behavior, right? I hope you know, right? This is your diode behavior. Fine. Okay, so this is how let me redraw this one, the diode behavior. So how does a diode looks like? IV curve. So this is your I and this is your V. Sorry, this will go through, right? This is your typical diode behavior. Fine. So this is we are understood. Now the question is, what happens if there is a light as well? Okay. Now we will try to understand what will happen if there is light as well. If light is also there. Suppose light is being excited from the P side. Okay. So what will happen is that some of the electrons will get excited from here to here. Okay. And it will constitute what? When the electrons reach here, it's easier for the electrons to come from this side, right? It will come down to here, and the holes will remain here. The holes will remain here, and this constitutes a new current. Okay, and what is the direction of the current? The current direction is in this way. This is I illuminated. Okay, and what is the corresponding point? The corresponding point is here. Similarly, in this second case as well, there will be a new current here, whose direction will be like this, I illuminated. And what is the corresponding point? The corresponding point is that it will shift towards the bottom, it will come to here. And the third case, it will be like this here. So if I combine these 3 points, 1, 2, and 3, how does it look like? It will be something like this. Okay, so the red curve is called dark when there is no light, whereas this green curve is illuminated when there is a light there. Okay, so when there is a light, as you can see, this curve shift towards the bottom side, towards the lower side. Okay, and how does this dark current is illustrated? So I equals to I naught e to the power QV by KT minus 1. Right? So this is your diode equation, if you remember. And what is the illuminated case? In the illuminated case, the equation is I equals to I naught exponential QV by KT minus 1 minus IL. You see, there is an extra current which is coming here. And why this extra IL is coming here? This IL is coming here because the light is falling on the diode, and that light is converting electrons and hole pairs. And those electron and hole pairs are creating an extra current inside the circuit. Okay, and that's the reason why you see shift in the IV curve. Okay. So this is how your IV characteristic looks like in the dark, and this is how it looks like in the case of when there is a light as well. Okay, we can define a terminology which is called field factor, which is the ratio of S1 and S2. What is S1? S1 is for this particular rectangle, and S2 is this particular rectangle. Okay, this is the point where we are getting the maximum voltage and maximum current. Okay, and this point where it crosses this voltage curve, it is known as VOC, open circuit voltage, and this is called short circuit current, this particular point. Okay, and how do we define the efficiency of solar cell? Efficiency of solar cell is nothing but P out by P in. Okay, and what is P out? Output energy is nothing but your Vm multiplied by Im divided by P input. And how can we define this field factor? Field factor, I already said this is defined by as S1 by S2. What is S1? S1 is this one, which is multiplication of this side and multiplication of this side. So it is nothing but VM IM, and S2 is VOC multiplied by ISC. Okay, so if I replace this VM and IM from here, what I get is that my efficiency is defined as VOC multiplied by ISC multiplied by field factor, okay, and divided by P in. So this is the formula for efficiency of solar cell. VOC ISC multiplied by field factor divided by P in. Okay, P in is most of the cases is around 1000 watt per meter square. This is standard. We don't need to worry about. What we need to worry about is open circuit voltage, ISC, and field factor. So what we want is that we want our open circuit voltage, ISC, and field factor to be as high as possible. Okay. This is the equivalent circuit of a solar cell. This is the equivalent circuit of a solar cell, and as you can see here that a solar cell is nothing but a PN junction diode, and which is in parallel with a current source. Okay. And once the charges are produced, we need to collect it, right? And this is something which we call it the charge collection. And how charges are collected? So this is a typical picture of a silicon solar cell, and this is a typical picture of a perovskite solar cell. So you can see there is a PN junction diode here. This is the emitter, which is N type, and this is a base, which is called P type. So you don't need to worry about what is emitter and what is base here. You simply see it as a as a junction here, and as you can see is light comes from the top side. Light comes from the top side here also as well. In the perovskite case, light comes from the bottom side. So we need to collect the charges which is being produced here. So how charges are collected? We need some electrodes. So you can see there are some fingers here. So these are the silver fingers here, and we can see the rear contact, which is basically an aluminum. So once the electrons and holes are produced inside the material, they travel towards the opposite direction, and they are being collected on the respective electrodes. And once they are collected in the respective electrodes, the current is being generated in the external circuit. Okay. So we understood how charges are being collected. So one thing which we need to understand is that in the case of silicon solar cell, which is on the left hand side, you can see this texturing. You see this texturing. Let me change the color. You see some texturing here. So this is the same texturing which we learned in previously, that we need to texture our surface to improve the absorption, right? And this is your PN junction diode. This is the junction. Okay, this is your N type, and this is your P type. This is your N type. Okay, and this is the junction. This is the junction. Okay, and once the electrons are produced, they are being collected by this electrodes here, which is the silver here on the top side, and we have the aluminum on the back side. Okay. That's it from my side actually. Tomorrow we have another talk from my side, which is perovskite solar cell, the future of photogenerated current. So in case you are more interested about I will continue from this particular topic of efficiency of solar cells, and I will talk specifically about a perovskite solar cell, which is the next generation of solar cells. So if you want to know more about the perovskite solar cell, I request you all to join in tomorrow again. And if you have any doubts, what you can do is that you can mail me. Okay, my email, you can get my email address from from my website, or even for the slides which I will share it to you. So in case you have any questions, please mail it to me. I will be happy to answer all of your questions. Okay, thank you very much.
Sir, we cannot ask during the end of the session.
No, you are the session for discussion. So please go ahead and ask. Yeah.
So I have a short questions. I can take 2 or 3 short questions. Yes, please.
Okay, sir. Okay, thank you, Dhritish. Sir, you have explained very well. Hello.
Yes, yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, you are.
Myself is Dr. Mahesh Chand Sharma. I am working as assistant professor in one of the deemed university in Jaipur, Rajasthan. Sir, you have explained very well the history of the solar cell and physics of the photovoltaic. And I have a doubt, or I can say that I want to ask a few questions. Sir, you have explained the efficiency of the solar cell. So I would like to ask you, what are the key factors which is affecting the efficiency of the solar cell?
There are many things. I mean, solar cell is a stack of many layers, right? It
Yes.
has the absorbing material, it has the electrodes. So there are many things going on inside the solar cell. As I can say to you that we need to properly manage the light inside. We need a proper texturing. We need an interactive layer. There are electrodes on the top and the bottom. We need the electrodes to be very good conductors, right? So there are many.
Okay.
So
Yes, sir.
I don't know which particular point you are looking for, but it's a culmination of many factors, right? I cannot pinpoint only one factor, because if you improve only one factor and do not look into the other factors, then the efficiency will not improve. So you have to take a look from all the layers, all the physics, and take into consideration everything which is going on inside. You need a material which is perfectly absorber, which absorbs most of the light. You need conductors. You need good transparent electrodes. So I will suggest you to please join in tomorrow, because I will continue this topic, and you will get to understand what are the
Definitely, sir.
different things which is important for solar cell efficiency improvement. So I will touch upon this
Definitely,
topic.
sir. Okay, I will join during the 5 days. And sir, you also first slide also hello,
Yes.
and uh, in one slide you have also the light mentioned the light management. I
Yes.
think, sir, in the light management you have talked about the solar energy spectrum.
No.
And
In light.
as per
Yes. Okay. Go ahead.
your slide, you have mentioned the 5% of the UV, 49% of the infrared, and
Yes. Yes.
visible, and 49 infrared and 46. Okay, sir.
Yes. Yes.
These
Yes.
has been calculated any limit. You are aware of the Shockley limit. But as per the Shockley limit, the maximum efficiency of the solar cell is it will reach up to the 43 or 42%.
No,
So
it's about
now
33%. Yes.
33%. But
Yeah.
now, okay. But you have mentioned the 40%, 49% are visible spectrum.
Yes.
So
No,
it
I mean,
is,
Shockley quasar limit tells you about if you have a particular band gap of a material, then how much maximum efficiency you can get. That is Shockley quasar limit. Okay. The thing which
okay.
I mentioned here is that UV 5%, 49% UV visible, and 46% infrared is the percentage of the total solar spectrum. Percentage of the total
Okay.
solar spectrum. So out of the solar spectrum, 5% is UV, visible is around 50%, and infrared is about 46%. So this
Okay,
percentage
sir.
is not solar cell efficiency. This is the percentage of the solar spectrum.
Okay. Solar spectrum. Okay. And one question also, then what should be the minimum thickness of the depletion layer in the thin film solar cell? What it should be?
No, I mean, you cannot determine. I mean, if you want uh, to know what is the typical thickness of depletion layer, I would say it. In the case of silicon solar cell, we want depletion layer to be as low as possible, and you can control
Sir,
this thickness of this depletion layer by the doping concentrations.
dope.
By playing with the doping concentration, the N type and the P type, you can control the thickness of the depletion region. And you will again, I will touch upon this topic tomorrow as well. That
Yes.
not for all the solar cells you need a depletion region. And there are some other region type of solar cell, which is also the perovskite solar cell. You do not need PN junction diode at all. So yeah, I mean, there are many things. Many solar cell techniques have different techniques, but the physics remains the same. Yes.
Okay. Yes. Okay, sir. Last question. You are aware of, means you are in the background of the photovoltaic, and I would like to ask you, any group is working of the PV recycle in India?
Sorry, which cycle?
PV recycle, because now after 5 or
Recycling.
10 years we will face the
Recycling.
some
Recycling.
recycling.
I'm not so sure in India PV recycling, because I have to check. I'm not so sure if somebody is really working. I know there are many groups who are working on the research of photovoltaics. There are many groups in IIT Bhilai as well. Myself is also working on perovskite solar cells. But recycling, I'm not so sure. I haven't come across any group who works in recycling of solar cells in India, specifically.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dhriti. So, thanks for this wonderful talk. We have next talk at 11:45 by myself. So I'll be speaking on the fundamental aspects of radiative transfer, ranging from astronomy to photonics. And it will be a very interactive talk. So 11:45, we begin again. So there is a brief break, like 10-15 minutes now, and we will reconvene at 11:45.
Okay. Thanks, Mahavir.
Yeah, thanks, Dhriti. So please be back at 11:45 at the same WebEx link. That is the same WebEx for all 5 days, for all talks. We will be using the same link, so we are not changing the link. So.